Hey, folks, we're back and we're talking about software supply chain security, which has been a top of mind issue for a lot of folks these days. But we have a survey over on DevOps.com where the question was put to C-level executives about whether or not they had any visibility into their software supply chain. And half of them said they didn't. I, I looked at this whole thing and I kind of smiled and I went, wow, C-level executives actually know they have a software supply chain. So, is this becoming a board level issue, or is this something that's a moment in time because there's just more noise in the system, or what's going on here?
So, with regard to whether or not it's a board level issue, the answer is board does oversight. For oversight purposes, the board should at least know to ask the question, what are we doing with supply chain related issues? Because supply chain attacks have become a major problem. Companies have been ruined because, for example, there was a bit wallet application where they uploaded malicious software into their core code base. And I think what's happened is over time, and a lot of people, if you're not in the programming space, don't really realize, but code has not, like, code used to be written originally. Maybe there were a few library programs around to implement some basic functions, but lately what software has become and why you can start implementing generative AI to write software is because programmers have started not to write their own code, but to pull code segments together from lots of different places. So that's number one. And a lot of people are not tracking well where they're pulling these software packages from. And that's a serious problem. And that's why you have supply chain, because the code you pull from could be malicious. The code you pull from can have bugs and all this sort of stuff that you don't know until you know. Now, the issue is once bugs are reported, there's no understanding of where they came from or where your own software came from. And if you're impacted, this is why a SBOM, software bill of materials, has become a critical discussion in the cybersecurity space as well as in the coding space, because you need to understand where these packages are being pulled from to know whether or not you have potential issues. So, for example, if you're a defense contractor and you're pulling code in from China, that's a problem in all likelihood, as an example. However, the other part of it is you might know where you're pulling your code in from, but you don't know where your vendors are pulling their code in from. And then so you have first level problems of writing your own code, second level problems of pulling in other code you might purchase, third level problems where you're pulling in code that other people have written. Then you have where are these people pulling their code in from? And in some cases, supply chain attacks have been down 4 or 5 levels of coding where smart criminals have gone in and figured out, wait a second, I know this program pulls in this library of code, and that program pulls in that library of code, and that program pulls in that library of code. So I'm going to embed something, a malicious piece of code, 5 layers down that I know will eventually be pulled into the software of my target. And that's why these software bills of materials are critical, but it's also why it's so difficult. Because if you have LLM or generative AI pulling software together and it has to track, and maybe it can track better than people. But this is a concern that it's you use the term octopus, but it's a massive octopus with countless arms and arms of arms and arms that boards need to start putting some governance in place. But it's a serious issue. And if you don't have a firm understanding, and even if you do have a firm understanding of where software is coming from, you're still likely not fully visible. And this needs to be addressed. And I don't know if the study goes as far into the depth or it was a trivial marketing study, but it needs to be addressed. I'll say it that way.
I mean, the gist of the survey was if you don't have visibility, you're much more likely to suffer a breach than if you do have visibility. I don't necessarily buy into that. I think there's visibility and then there's visibility, right?
Well, I mean, that's Well, I think at least if you're starting to look, you'll come up with the more obvious ones. But like I mentioned, when it's 5 layers deep, that's where you're going to start having the problems. And, this is where, again, governance, like it's a pain to change how people program and force them to write their own originals code again. But in some levels, that's and until it does, you're gonna have these issues
No,
and you
so
need to
I
have
have
better
I
cases.
have another solution. Look, we live in a world of Frankencode, right? Apps today are built by stitching together components. Almost all of these components are downloaded from different repos. There's your choke point. Before you download a component from a repo, the repo has to sort of bless it and say, as far as we know, this is the latest version of this component. It's been verified, vulnerability-wise. It's not been tampered with. The checksum is right, blah, blah, blah. There is a very natural choke point at the repo, want to call it a repo firewall maybe, where we can make sure that the components that the developers are using are safe. And at the same time, that information goes right into your SBOM.
Well, let me actually say how that did not work, because there was a case, and again, the Bitwallet case I think I mentioned, where what happened was there was a common software utility, like I think it was a compiler or something, and the guy who wrote this compiler that was used by millions decided, I give up. I don't want to do it anymore. So the person basically let his domain expire. Somebody else re-registered the domain, got the email that was sent to verify the person's identity. They took the compiler software, embedded malicious software into it, recompiled it. It was then a legitimate piece of software from a supposedly trusted person, and it made it all the way up into commercial products.
But that piece was not in the repo. That's the issue, right? It was. We saw that. When did it happen? Was it OpenVPN, Ira, years ago? It turned out there were like 2 people that maintained OpenVPN in the whole world, and it, it got a vulnerability and introduced into it. And the idea behind these repos is I think there's more girth to them. Anyway, hey, we've got to end it today. I'm sorry. It was a great discussion. I wish we had another hour, but we don't. Camberley, Ira, John, Mike, of course, thanks for joining. Thank you for joining. We hope you've enjoyed TechStrong Gang today. Stay tuned for TechStrong TV. We'll be back Monday with even more fun and more AI, more security, more DevOps platform, cloud, and everything else. Have a great weekend, everyone. I'm Alan Schimmel. We're out.